this is just amazing. I mean, this is now the second state to do this. Nevada was the first. It looks like, well, it doesn't look like. I mean, the Florida Power and Light, which is the largest utility in Florida, it's actually a subsidiary of the largest utility in Florida, has written legislation that the Republicans in the Florida legislature have picked up. Now, there used to be a time in America when big business and politicians, at the very least, pretended to be patriotic. You know, they wrapped everything they were doing in well, there's a good reason for this. You know, we're trying to save the country, or we're trying to save the environment, or, you know, I mean, even George W. Bush, you know, with his Healthy Skies initiative, right, which allowed more pollution into the air, or his Healthy Forests plan, which allowed more clear-cutting of forests. At least they pretended. They're not even pretending anymore. I mean, Florida Power and Light wrote this legislation, according to news reports. It's called HB 4, House Bill 4. And it has passed both the House and the Senate in Florida. It's waiting for DeSantis to sign it. And bottom line, right now, if you want to put solar panels on your house in Florida, you pay a fee. I believe it's $25 a month. I'd have to double check, but it's a relatively small monthly fee that covers the cost to the utility of dealing with the possibility that you would be feeding power back down into the utility during a time that the utility has crashed. But, you know, which is not an unreasonable thing, although you've got these boxes that you have to attach that prevent that from happening anyway. But, you know, there's a fee already being paid to the utility. And then, you know, when you feed power into the grid, the utility buys it from you. It's called net metering. In other words, your meter goes backwards when you're feeding power, solar power, from your rooftop into the local power grid. Well, Florida Power and Light has written this legislation that has passed the Florida House and Senate that basically radically cuts the amount that the utility has to pay you, that has an open-ended ability to, over time, reduce that amount year after year, and adds fees if you want to, you know, put solar panels on your house and connect them to the grid. So if this law passes, or if this law is signed into law by Governor DeSantis, over the objection, by the way, of 84% of Florida voters, 84% of Florida voters, that's 76% of Republicans, 94% of Democrats, support being able to sell power back to the utility at a slight discount off what you would buy it from the utility, but, you know, being able to sell it back. But the Republican corruption in Florida is like way over the top. Rooftop solar in Florida represents less than 1% of all the power generated in the state. Most of the electricity generated in Florida is generated with natural gas, actually. But, you know, rooftop, less than 1%. But even at that, the solar power industry in Florida, employs over 40,000 people and accounts for $18 billion in annual revenue to the state. And even if those numbers were to double or triple, so it becomes 2% or 3%, it's going to be more employment, it's going to be more stimulus, but it's still not going to really hurt Florida Power and Light. In fact, most of the studies indicate that you have to hit about 10%, generate about 10% of the electricity that the utility is generating before the utility starts noticing that, you know, they're starting to substantially lose money. But nonetheless, here's where we're at. This is the Republican Party, hands out. Hey, a utility wants to write a piece of legislation for us to sign? Cool, just give it to us. A recent analysis found in the U.S. Congress, this is at the federal level. See, I think the solution for this is we need a federal law that defines standards for all utilities in the United States in terms of net metering. The problem is 109 members of the House of Representatives and 30 senators in the 117th Congress, quote, refuse to acknowledge the scientific evidence of human-caused climate change, which is one of the reasons that this is such good policy. Right? The more people who are generating electricity off their rooftops, the fewer greenhouse gas emissions are going into the atmosphere to make electricity. It doesn't just save consumers money. It also might save the planet. But when you've got, 139 members of Congress right now openly denying climate change because they're taking millions from the fossil fuel industry every year. And not only that, these Republicans are backed up by a well-funded climate change denying network of over 1,500 right-wing radio stations, 200 or 300 right-wing Spanish language radio stations, hundreds of over 300 right-wing television stations, 3 right-wing cable TV networks, national and statewide right-wing think tanks, hundreds of conservative publications, from newspapers to magazines to websites, all echoing this message that climate change is a hoax. They passed a piece of legislation like this a year or so ago in Nevada. And almost immediately, Solar City had to lay off almost 500 people. It just killed the solar industry in that state. And you'd think, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, you would think that Nevada would be the very best place in the country to put solar panels on your rooftop. Well, not anymore. It actually, in many cases, can cost you more than if you didn't. It just doesn't work because of this. So we need to pass federal standards that would preempt these state efforts and get ahead of this and, get back to this bringing solar power to America. This is pretty straightforward stuff. We need to federalize this. Any ideas on how to sell this? It seems to me that the strongest way to sell it, talking about climate change is a good thing and it'll get a lot of people's attention. But it seems to me like the strongest way to sell this is your utilities are trying to rip you off. You're buying electricity from them only because they're the only source. And they now want to make it so that when they're not the only source, when they have competition from the solar panels on your roof, they want to unfairly kneecap you. Seems to me like that's the best way to sell it, but I don't know, maybe you have other ideas about how to promote this. This seems to me like a winner for Democrats and a loser for Republicans. We'll see how it plays out.